The following interview is being conducted as part of the Price of Freedom project by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform our community of the sacrifices made by those in the military on battlefields around the world. Each veteran interviewed received an Award of Valor while serving in combat. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the ETV Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this Military Heritage Program. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Kennemer. Welcome to our program. Today we'll be talking with former U.S. Army aviator Arnold E. Sandy Weand. Sandy served 30 years in Army aviation, attaining the rank of colonel before retiring in 1999. He is the recipient of 2 Air Medals with Valor for his heroic actions while serving in Vietnam. Sandy was inducted into the Madison County Military Hall of Heroes in 2018. Sandy, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Thank you for your time. Appreciate you taking time to be with us today. Tell us a little about yourself. I understand you're a Florida native, right?
That's correct. The older people sort of in my family have done the genealogy back for over 5 generations, 1700s. I was born in Florida, and of course, it was mostly rural in the north, what we call the Panhandle. And I was born in a place called Marianna, Florida, and then.
Now, what is that close to, Sandy?
That's it's on Highway 90, and it's probably between Tallahassee and Pensacola as a point of interest. I moved to a small town. Actually, my parents lived there. After I was born, we went back to the small town, and it was called Bluntstown, Florida, and that's famous because it was the 50-mile bathroom stop between Tallahassee and Panama City Beach, Florida. So,
well, that's very historic,
so
right?
That's historic. It was a rural area. My high school class was about 63 students, male and female.
Yeah.
And I did the typical things that boys and girls of that era did. I loved cars, loved to fish and hunt and camp. Those types of things, and participated in sports in high school to a degree. And from there, I was on to college and the military.
Did you your family, your dad, did he serve in the military?
My father and 2 of my uncles were all in World War II. Dad was he was in the Army as a enlisted. He was an armorer. I worked down at Dale Mabry Airfield in Tallahassee, trained in the foreign national pilots. He was then commissioned a lieutenant through the Ordnance Engineering School at Aberdeen, Maryland, and went overseas from that point. My Uncle Bill was in the infantry. He did not do the D-Day invasion, but he went in soon thereafter and fought all the way across France and Germany to the end of the war. He stayed in the military and retired as a lieutenant colonel out of Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. Then my Uncle Charlie was in the Army Air Corps, and he was a engine mechanic, and he ultimately ended up working on the B-29 aircraft that were used in the Pacific to do the long-range bombing to Japan.
Right, and carry the atomic bomb.
That's correct.
That's right. Now, when did you become, you're an aviator, Army aviator, when did you become interested in aviation? Did you see a lot of planes flying over your area and you say, hey, I'd like to do that?
Well, that's certainly when an airplane flew over, it was an event.
Yeah.
Living in the rural South, we weren't near any major airports, so we didn't see any regular air traffic. And if an aircraft came over, it was always a mad dash to get outside and watch.
Yeah. And
I can remember even in school, the teacher did not get upset if all the boys ran to the windows to look.
Yeah.
Particularly if it was very loud and sounded very low. I've always loved aviation, in the military for that part. I guess probably from my dad and my uncles, although they never talked about their experiences to me. The things that sort of shaped me were what was on TV. At the time, TV was in its infancy.
Right.
We used to go to other people's houses to watch until we actually owned one.
I can relate to that.
So our news really came from the radio or from what was called the newsreel, shown at the motion pictures, or what we call the movies, on Saturday afternoon. the Army ran a newsreel that was called The Big Picture.
Right.
And the lead-in shot for the start of their news was a Mojave CH, I believe that was a 37, or if I remember right, maybe 34, I'm not sure, but it was a big twin reciprocal engine helicopter, and it would land and these big gull doors would open and this Jeep would drive out pulling a small artillery piece, and I just thought, man, that's just got to be it. I mean,
awesome.
That's the neatest thing going. There were a couple other things that probably pointed me to aviation. Like I said, I was really focused on just the Army before I got to the aviation part. When I was in the Cub Scouts, we had a field trip to a grass strip where a gentleman had what I'm going to call a Piper Cub. It could have been a different brand, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And every Cub Scout got to do a circuit around the pattern. And so that was my flying experience, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
Somewhat scary, but also just to have a different view of the world, you know, looking down and seeing things at different perspective was really, really good.
Now, you left high school and went to Florida State, and I think you continued that interest in aviation.
I did. There's a couple other things that I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, sure.
Was that I can remember going with my aunt and my mom, and we were going up to visit relatives somewhere in southern Alabama, which evidently was close to Fort Rucker. And I can remember watching a Army helicopter land in a field, and my aunt actually pulled over to the side of the road so we could watch this helicopter land and take off. And again, that was just very, very impressive. You know, I just thought, man, this is really good. And so those things just sort of built towards being in the military and towards being, you know, an aviator. My Uncle Bill actually went to Vietnam in the 1960-61 time frame. And I can remember him coming back and talking to my dad about, you know, he could see the writing on the wall, so to speak, that there was going to be more American involvement over the next several years. And so I think they probably planned out a few things for me, like make sure that I got into college and went as an officer versus being over there as an enlisted guy, rifleman or something like that. So that had some impacts. But I did graduate from high school, Blountstown High School, in 1965, and I knew that I was not socially mature enough or emotionally mature enough to be ready to go off to 4 years of college. Plus, I'm not sure that it was financially viable for mom and dad. So we had in Florida at the time a system called junior colleges, and there were several of them throughout the state. But if you went to this 2-year junior college and you were fed automatically in to your junior year at a state university, you had to make the application. But you know, you just went right through. So I opted to do that, and that was the school was called Chipola Junior College, and it was actually named after the Chipola Indian tribe that was in the region. And it was, like I said, it was a 2-year college. It was basically a commuter college. They did have dorms for people that came from long distances, but all the counties ran school buses, you know, from the courthouse or the high school or something. They would commute the students by school bus up to the Chipola Junior College. And of course, at the time, my dad had started working back in Mariana, and so I could carpool up with him. I just had to kill some time on campus until he got off work in the evening, but that wasn't hard to do because there were plenty of young ladies to talk to and that kind of stuff. You know? So that's how I sort of ended up at Chipola Junior College. The interesting thing about that was when I was there, you know, that was basically 66 and 67. Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin had happened, you know, just prior to graduating from high school, and that had a big impact.
Right.
And when my 63 student class graduated, we had set up a temporary platform out on the football field so the parents and visitors could sit in the football stadium and watch. But what I distinctly remember was Miss Goodman was the secretary of the local draft board, or selective service board as they were called. And she was at the end of the stage, so once you got your diploma and shake the principal's hand and the superintendent's hands and walked off the stage, Miss Goodman handed every boy a selected service or a draft card. And for the vast majority, there was only 2 selections. One was 1A, which meant you were immediately available to be drafted, and the other one, which was 2S, which meant you were deferred for collegiate studies. That's what the 2 had. Well, I had already applied to Chipola and been accepted and knew where I was going, so when she handed me my card, it was indeed 2S. Okay. Chipola is at Marianna. Marianna's not too far from Fort Rucker, so the whole time I was there for the 2 years, there was the constant sound of the wop, wop, wop of Hueys in the air. They were using the stage fields near the college or flying in and out of the local airport, you know, doing different types of training. Hadn't given any thought to it, just knew it was there, knew that my goal was to graduate from college. And you know, figure out a way to basically, you know, get into the service, and I knew that wasn't going to be hard to do. So these 2 Navy guys showed up, and they were in their white uniforms, and they looked really sharp. And they said, "We're here recruiting," and so I said, "Well, I'm going to talk to them."
Sure.
And so I went down and talked to them, and they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to fly." You know, I'm thinking jet fighters. You know, that's what I wanted to do, and so that would be pretty cool being in the Navy. So he said, "Okay, you got to take these series of tests." And so I took these series of tests and did fine. And then the last one was basically a military flight aptitude test, and it was broken into 2 parts. The first part was you know, aviation terms and definitions and that kind of stuff. And then the second part was a visualization of your flight attitude and what your view would be looking out the cockpit. And my total flight experience at that time had been that one loop around the traffic pattern as a Cub Scout and a Cub, and so that did not help me very well. Needless to say, I didn't do very well on the aptitude test. So the Navy guys were non-pulse. They said, "No problem, go ahead and sign up. We'll let you go through the summer camp training type thing, and then we'll let you take the test again." And I was just a little skeptical. I'm sure that they were being honest, but I was just, you know, I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do that. So I thanked them, and I said I would think about it. The Army came. I don't think the Air Force ever showed up. They were still getting their pilots through the academy and through the 4-year ROTC program. But the Army showed up, and you know, I went by and just talked to them because I knew what was coming. And they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to fly." He said, "Oh, that's no problem." He said, "We got a test. You take the test, you pass it." He says, "You know, we can get you right in." And I said, "Well," I said, "I took that test with the Navy, and I didn't do very well." So he said, "Well, I can help you out a little bit." He said, "I can't be in when you take the test." He said, "You have to take your test on." He said, "But you know, let me just give you some pointers." And so I had sort of gone through and looked at some aviation books, and I was sort of up to speed on the terms and the definitions and stuff for those questions. But he folded a sheet of paper into the old typical airplane, and he said, "Hold this up to your nose," with the tail of the airplane up to your nose. And he said, "What do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see, you know, basically I see ground and air in its level." And he said, if you look your head up, what do you see?" And I looked up and I said, "Oh, sky." He said, "Okay, well, look down." And so I tilted my head down and said, "What do you see?" I said, "It's ground." And so, you know, tilt to the right like this. And I said, "Well, I see part horizon, you know, air, and then part ground." He said, "Okay." He said, "Now you understand what you see out of an aircraft if you're sitting in it." He said, "Just imagine that you're sitting in this little paper airplane when you take the test."
Yeah.
And he said, "I don't even care if you fold your own airplane when you're in there." He said, so he gave me the books, you know, and I sat down and I took the definitions part, and I got through that, and then I got to the flight aptitude, and I was turning my head and doing all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, needless to say, I passed the test with flying colors. So I said, "What do I need to do?" And he said, "We're going to sign you up." And I said, "Well, I want to finish college before I go." And he said, "Well,
You were attending Florida State at that time?
No, this is Chipola Junior still. I'm
okay.
my sophomore year.
Okay.
And he said, "Well," he said, "the Army's got a new program." He said, "We're going to do a 2-year program," because, I mean, the Army needed officers. That's the bottom line. He said, "So we're going to do a 2-year ROTC program, and you can get in that when you get to Florida State." He said, "But to get into that, you've got to go on active duty through basic training."
I see.
And so I'm saying, well, you know, wait a minute. This isn't going to be one of those deals. Once I sign on the line, it's all out the door. He said, no. He said, this is legit. So I went home, talked to Dad about it, and he said, well, if you really want to go to flight school, this is the way to do it. And of course, Mom wasn't having any of it. So I signed up, and that summer after I graduated from Chipola, I had my associate degree. That's what you get, 2-year associate degree. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and was inducted into the Army as a private E-nothing. And I went through basic training. I was in B-82, that was Bravo Company, 8th Battalion, 2nd Training Brigade. And we were at Harmony Church, which was a famous area at Fort Benning. A Company was draftees or enlistees, as was C Company. We all went through the same training. But at the end of basic training, and that time basic training was 6 weeks, they went on to AIT and ultimately to Vietnam. And as I was told at the end of AIT, they handed me back a bundle of civilian clothes and said, we'll see you. And so I walked out the front gate, rode back home, and that fall then, I went into to Florida State as a junior and enrolled in the 2-year ROTC program. Having been on active duty, it was not quite as severe or austere as I thought it might be. But anyhow, it wasn't an issue. So in the ROTC staff there were 3 or 4 majors that handled most of the students. Of course, they had the commander, who was a colonel, and some other people in there, staff sergeant and that kind of stuff. But I got in fairly good with the majors because they worked very closely with the students. And one of them said, well, he said, you were going to flight school? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we got this brand new program. I said, what's that? And he said, well, you can go and get your private pilot's license while you're here in ROTC. And I said, I'm down, you know, put me down, you know. So I signed up, and I may have been the first. If I wasn't the first, I was one of the very first at FSU that went through the Army flight training program while I was an ROTC student there. Graduated from FSU, was a distinguished military graduate, and that brought a new set of issues to be resolved. That was a high honor, and back then most Army officers were commissioned as reserve officers with reserve rank, which meant that they could be reduced in rank if they needed to in the Army. So I said, okay, I don't have a problem with that, you know, getting a regular Army commission sounds real good. And they said, what the downside is you have to go into one of the 3 combat arms, and that time was infantry, armor, artillery. And so one of the majors pulled me aside and he said, this is good. He said, but you need to understand what's going to happen to you. They're going to commission you in one of those 3, and I had chosen artillery. He said, but then you're going to have to go serve you're going to have to go through the course, the officer course, and then you're going to have to serve a familiarization tour. He said, which means you're going to be an FO, forward observer, in Vietnam for a year and come back. He said, then they're going to send you to flight school. He said, I fully think that they will fulfill their part by sending you to flight school. He said, but you need to understand combat arms is not really involved with aviation. You know, so you're always going to be behind your peers, and as a regular officer, you know, it's just going to be difficult. So he said, you know, not trying to tell you what to do, he said, but you might think about not accepting their...
Think hard about it anyway.
So I understood what he was trying to tell me, and I did not accept the regular commission. I was commissioned as a reserve officer, graduated from Florida State in August, and went there directly to Fort Eustis, to the...
so you didn't go to Fort Rucker right off?
Went straight to Fort Eustis. That was in Virginia. And they were the Transportation Corps home base. Okay, the Army Transportation Corps at the time owned basically all the Army aviation assets, the career assets. Okay, and so it was a logical place for an aviator to be. Went through the officer basic course and left there and went out to Fort Walters, Texas. Now, Fort Walters, Texas was about, I guess, 40, 50 miles west of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and was out on the plains there, and that's where the Army did all of the basic helicopter flight training. Classes came in, and you were set up by class number according to the fiscal year. I was in 70-26, which meant that I was the 26th class to start in fiscal year 70. and we were brown hats. Every class wore a different color hat or cap, and that's how they could keep everybody separated as they staged buses to move to the different airfields, or to loaded people from the airfields to take back to the companies for Army stuff.
Yeah.
Our class had 2 helicopters that we flew, which was the OH-13, or excuse me, the OH-23, okay, and the TH-55, which was a sort of a recip OH-6 version. It was very much smaller, but it was, that's what
Didn't
it
have
was.
a jet engine.
Right.
Right.
Okay. And neither did the 23. So we went through the training. I had the air sense from having my private pilot's license through ROTC. I knew how to navigate. I knew how to communicate. All I really had to do was learn the difference in flying a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft. And so after about 8 hours, I soloed. And then from that point on, your flights were sometimes solo when you would go out and do your maneuvers, and sometimes you were doing instruction to see how you were doing and to assign different maneuvers. And so hordes of takeoff and landings, lots of hovering, ultimately worked up to where we would land on pinnacles and take off on pinnacles, both solo and dual, and the same thing in confined areas. And you know, in the confined area you landed, and you literally had to get out of the helicopter and sort of set up a little T with sticks or something on what your departure point would be to clear the trees, you know, and that was all just making us learn how to visualize being able to clear the trees.
Was it, Sandy, let me ask you, was it, did you, at this time, did you envision it was like, did it turn out like that you envisioned while in school? Did it come to you easy? Was it, did you just fall into it as you anticipated you would?
Yes, it really did. A lot of that has to do with the quality instructors. If you have good instructors that can see the way that you learn quickest, they will key on those factors, and that's how they teach you, okay? If you get a relatively inexperienced or a new instructor or an instructor from another service, say out of the Navy, the Air Force, they might not have that relationship with you initially.
Do it differently, yeah.
Yeah, so that all worked out real well. Went through the whole spiel there. Graduated from the training at Fort Walters on basically a Thursday, and we were to start school at Fort Rucker then the following Monday. And of course I had everything I owned in the back of my car, and so traveling down was nothing, but I had met a young lady at college.
I see.
And we had stayed in touch, and so to the point where we decided that we were going to get married. So while I was in the primary training there at Fort Walters, you know, she was setting up the wedding event to occur on a Saturday, because that gave me from Thursday to Saturday to drive to Jacksonville, get everybody over there.
Yeah.
Have the rehearsal and the rehearsal dinner on Saturday night, and have the wedding on Sunday afternoon, which was, all this is sort of a little abnormal for the church. And then you know, we got in the car and drove to Fort Rucker, so to speak. So
kind of a tight schedule.
It was very tight. You know, so the old joke was got married on a 30-minute break in flight school. Actually, it was a weekend break.
Yeah.
But went to Fort Rucker then. Once we were at Fort Rucker, the first thing that we did was the instrument training, and all the instrument training was done in a OH-13 helicopter, and it was set up specifically for instrument training, and it was about a 35, 37-hour block of instruction. And the whole time that you flew that helicopter, you were either flying in weather conditions, meteorological weather conditions, or you were flying under a hood, and this was a hood that snapped over your helmet that limited your visibility just inside to the gauges. And you know, the instructor would always lift the helicopter up and always land the helicopter. You never did that, so you never were rated in it. But he would lift the helicopter up to a hover and give it to you, and I mean, and basically, you know, you would hover like you were in weather conditions to the point where you were taking off, and you know, you have to get all your IFR clearances and all your radio calls and all your frequencies and everything. You had a little knee pad there, you're writing all that stuff on it. And you could ask him to maintain the controls while you did that, but as soon as you got it all down and got the radios tuned, and it,
you turn it back over to you.
He turned it back over to you. And so for the first 35, 37 hours, I never saw Fort Rucker or the ground from the air.
How long was the training at Fort Rucker?
It was. Well, that's a good question. I think it was probably ended up being about three and a half, 4 months.
I see. Yeah.
From the time I got.
Did you go straight to Vietnam after that?
No, I did not. Once I finished up the instrument training, I went through the transition to the Huey. Everything was transitioned to the Huey.
Yeah.
And then you did the combat flight training, so to speak, where you learned to do low-level navigation. We did. Night flying, formation flights, and in and out of confined areas. Not very many pinnacles in southern Alabama to land on, but we did all that kind of stuff, and then we would lift troops and move troops, and we just did it all, and then of course graduated. Now, when I did graduate, a lot of the students went from there to a transition to a different helicopter, or they went on to Vietnam as a Huey pilot. Because I was the transportation corps, they took me back to Fort Eustis, and there I went through what was called the Aviation Maintenance Officers course. They called it AMOC, and you learn to do the aviation on the aircraft, the procedures, the bookkeeping, how to manage the aircraft and that kind of stuff. And that was another 8 or 10 week school. It was a very good school, and everybody should go through it, not just the maintenance officers, because it teaches you a whole lot about the aircraft that you don't have a chance to learn in flight school. So from there, I graduated from that with my bride, and we drove down to Savannah and went through the Cobra transition. The Cobra transition at that time was taught at Hunter Army Airfield. Savannah, the air base, the Air Force had turned it into caretaker status, and the Army had some reserve training down at Fort Stewart, but the Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield complex was not open. I mean, it was all just except for the Cobras. So we had the Cobras down at one end of the runway. We would take off out of there, and then we would go down to do our flying at the ranges down at Fort Stewart or Hinesville, Georgia.
Yeah.
From that graduation, that was we were there over Christmas. You had a little before Christmas, and the rest after Christmas. Left there and got to Vietnam the first part of March. That was 1971.
Tell us about your first impressions when you got to Vietnam. I mean, does it go through your head, that, hey, I'm in a war zone. I mean, people are going to be shooting at me. Is this kind of thoughts go through your head when you first arrived?
I think not initially. My very first impressions is when they opened the door. It was a charter, DC-8 or something like that. And when
what year was this?
This was in 1971.
71, okay.
But when they opened the door, we had landed at Tunson Air Base, and the heat and the smell just stifled into the aircraft. It was just overwhelming. By the time you got to the bottom of the ramp, you had your greens on and everything. Why we had to do that, I don't know, but we all flew over in dress greens, and you were just soaking wet. And then they loaded us all on buses, and that was sort of the first indication that something wasn't right, because when you got on the bus, the windows opened, but they had this thick wire cloth that was looked like 1/4-inch mesh, but it was also about 1/4-inch in diameter, and that was welded over the windows of the bus, all the way around. And I'm thinking, that's a reason, So they bussed us over to the 94th Replacement Battalion, our depot, and they called it the Repo Depot. And then somebody cut orders there, down through the aviation brigade to the aviation group to the aviation unit you were going to. That's sort of how it worked. So that was my first night. First 2 nights, I guess, were there in the Bien Hoa area, which was close to Saigon. And then, orders came out, said you're going to 3rd to 17th at Phu Loy, and somebody will take you to meet the helicopter. And I had traveled very light on purpose, and of course they had issued us all the basic stuff we needed there, which was jungle fatigues and a pair of boots at the time. And so we got out, got on the helicopter, and we flew to Phu Loy, where the unit was at the time.
I see. How long was it Did you go into combat, start flying combat missions initially, or was it like, did you have some more training there before you flew combat missions?
I think the biggest thing that one has to deal with when you go through that many time zones is your circadian rhythm, that your mind and your heart is thinking when it's day and when it's night, because basically you had flopped around to the other side of the world. So I found it very difficult at first to stay awake during the day and to sleep at night, and so you just sort of had to work through that. And they generally would say about a day per time zone, so that was probably a good 7 or 8 days. During that 7 or 8 days, you know, you in process into the unit, the S1, got all the details down, you know, you filled out all the forms. You know, you went down to S2, got the briefing on the area of operations over a map. You went to supply and got the rest of your, you know, your flight gear, your flight suits, another pair of boots, your helmet, all that different stuff that they issued you. And then you had to go through check rides. Well, since I was qualified in the Huey and the Cobra, I had to do both check rides. And so it wasn't a matter, there was always an instrument pilot or instructor pilot there to do the check ride. You had to wait till one of them wasn't flying a mission. So that process took the 7 or 8 days easy. And then once you got those 2 check rides, you jumped in the helicopter with somebody and you did a quick fly around the area of operations, you know, which was a couple hours easy. And then you were signed off to fly.
Did you have barracks, or were you in tents when you first arrived there at your base?
The answer is yes. We started out at Fuloy, and we were in a cantonment area that someone had built up. So we had concrete buildings with tin roofs. There were no windows, but everybody had a door, so you could actually, you know, close the door and have some privacy. When we were at Quan Loy, you know, we had wooden structures with tent tops. When I was at Anlock, it was basically a bunker. So, you know, it just depended on where you were. But at Fuloy, for the vast majority of the time, we had very what I would call acceptable quarters. Being an aviation maintenance officer, got to have a freezer. Because when you do maintenance on the transmission, where you're changing the input quills or the output quills, you have to you freeze the quill to contract it, so it will fit into the transmission case. That's how tight the tolerances are.
Well, you keep beer there too.
Well,
right?
absolutely.
Great. I always like to ask the veterans that served overseas, how was the food, Sandy? Well, give me your description of the food while you were in Vietnam.
It was there.
It was there. It was there.
It was there. You know, we had the mystery meat, and which was really roast beef. I think the Army got some bargain deal out of Australia, South Africa, somewhere for all these cows. So every meal was roast beef, and there was always a green tinge around the edges, which I'm sure was just the ink for inspection, but I was never quite sure. Breakfast was good. You know, it's hard to mess up a couple of eggs if you order them fried. And grits was always there a little bit, you know, and bacon, sausage. So breakfast was basically your stable meal. And then we had a mess sergeant that was able to convert all the force-issued oatmeal into cookies. So my routine was you know, basically a pitcher of water, eggs, bacon, toast, and then I always put 4 or 5 of the oatmeal cookies, and I'm talking about, you know, they were good-sized cookies, and I always put 4 or 5 in my flight helmet. And so during the day, I either ate C rations or the oatmeal cookies. If I was in the area, I might go up to the mess hall for lunch, but normally not. And then in the evenings, again, it was the cookies or C rations.
When you had free time, did however little that was, were you able to watch movies? Did you put up a screen or a sheet or something to watch movies, or what did you shoot? Did you have a pool table or something like that?
We didn't have very much free time. You know, normally worked all day, flew all day, worked during the night on maintenance. You know, so there wasn't a lot of free time. We did have USO shows that would come in, and this would be maybe a Korean band or a Japanese band. that had learned the American words to the rock and roll songs. They couldn't speak English, but they could mimic the words to the tunes, and so they would put on some shows. So, you know, I guess over the year I probably saw 2 of those maybe, but they were at Quan Loy. No movies. We did have a small club where there was a pool table there. I really wasn't into it that much. No. And then there was down at Benoit Air Base, they had a facility where you could take your own reel tape down there, and then they had all these reels of the music, and you could copy from their reels onto yours. So everybody had a tape recorder with a reel-to-reel and either some big speakers or headphones, you know, depending on what you wanted to do. Yeah. So you could listen to some music. Background noise was always good.
I'm sure you formed lasting friendships, Sandy, while you were in the service. Do you still stay in contact with a lot of your friends?
The answer is no, probably not enough. The guys that I was closest to are dead. I mean, they did not survive Vietnam, didn't survive the United States, so to speak. My closest friend was Ben Thompson. He was Chief Warrant Officer. He was over there on his second tour. He had been, I believe it was with the Greyhounds, his first tour. Mm-hmm. And he came, over as a maintenance asset to me to help me with the aircraft maintenance for the unit. We had 29 aircraft that we maintained, 3 different kinds, the Cobras, the Hueys, and either OH-6s or OH-58. We switched those out twice while I was there. And so Ben and I were very close, stayed in touch with him. He came to see me when I was stationed in California. We saw each other when we were stationed in Alaska. We went over and saw him in North Carolina, where he, ultimately lived until he passed away from cancer. Mm. So I stayed in touch with Ben over the years, and that's about the guy I was closest to. Now, there is a group of Vietnam helicopter pilots here locally, and we get together once a month for a social activity and quarterly for an expedition of some type, so to speak. And so I do stay in touch with them on a routine basis.
Good, good. Now, you were in different parts of the country and flew over different parts of Vietnam. Describe to our audience what the countryside was like in Vietnam.
Okay. Well, we were operating out of what was called the 3 Corps. And if you started up at the North and South Vietnam border, that was 1 Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and then 4 Corps was down in the Delta. So basically, if you put Saigon at the center of a clock, we operated from 9 to 12 all the way to the Cambodian border, and then of course we did operate across the border also. So that was our area of operations. It was flat that transitioned to mountainous. I would characterize it as flat terrain with the occasional mountain. We had a couple that were significant there. And then we had a lot of agrarian area, so it was cleared. There were, the rice paddies, the crops, that kind of stuff. But the non-cleared area was what we typically call triple canopy. And the trees were so tall that basically, getting through it was basically like going through 3 levels of growth. And you could be up in the air at the treetop and still be 100, 120 feet above the ground. Yeah. Flying Cobras didn't affect us too much, but flying Hueys trying to get in or out of a tight area, that was something that you had to deal with. It was like going into a bucket and then coming out.
It took a lot of skill.
Yep. Yeah, that's
right. Sandy, we mentioned earlier that you are the recipient of 2 Air Medals with Valor. Talk about the action that led to you receiving these awards.
The specific operations were around the Snool, Cambodia area, which was Highway 13 out of Saigon all the way up. And what had happened is, I think it was the spring of '71 before I arrived, the Army had just done a big support for the South Vietnamese Army into Laos, and it was called Lam Son 719 was the Vietnamese name. The American Army had a different name for it. I can't remember what it was. But we could not go on the ground. but we could support them in the air. And so the South Vietnamese did the incursion in, and it was specifically to cut the supply line coming down what was termed the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Right.
So the goods were coming out of North Vietnam, out of China, and through North Vietnam, and they were going down this trail through Laos and Cambodia, and then at the appropriate point they would branch to the left, so to speak, and go into South Vietnam. You know, and so that's how they maintain their line of communication, their resupply of weapons and replacement soldiers. So that had not turned out as good at cutting off the trail as they thought. Of course, the Air Force was doing interdiction day and night. So what happened was the next logical place for the Army to help the South Vietnamese try to impede that flow was at the Cambodian border. And so again, you know, the ARVN units would go across border to try to find these base camps and disrupt the flow, and we would support them. So in those operations, that's where I actually received both of the medals with the V device. The first one was, you know, as I said, supporting these troops. They did a sweep across the border into the area that we called Chup Rubber. At the time it was spelled C-H-U-P-P. I think it's C-H-U-P if you look on the map now. Okay. And that was a big rubber plantation, and it sort of crossed the borders, but basically was on the Cambodian side. And as they pushed through there, you know, they would find emplacements, and we would go in and provide the air support. So we got into an engagement, and there was you know, an anti-aircraft position that was not making things easy. And so we were trying to just, you know, normally what you'd do is if you were suppressing, you'd go in and fire maybe a pair of rockets and a little bit of a machine gun or grenade fire to break, you know, when you break, to cover your break. And so it would be, you know, the two of us, maybe two Cobras and one Loach, it would do the scouting. He would go down and scout and come back out, and we would shoot. So as we supported them, we were trying to meter this out to give them the maximum amount of coverage. Well, when this anti-aircraft weapon opened up on us, we all, you know, think it's probably 51 caliber, but we realized that we had to change, and so we went in to take it out. The two different Cobras and the Scout identified it for us, and we engaged and we took it out. And it was imperative to do so because the other aircraft that were coming in, you know, the Hueys and stuff, to extract the wounded and to bring in supplies, you know, they didn't want to go up against that. And so that was the first. I was flying with Chief Warrant Officer Steve Bartlett on that mission, and we both received the Valor device. A few days later, we were back in the same area, and we were staged. I think we were staged at Loc Ninh. Yeah, we were staged at Loc Ninh, and they had called the aircraft had been shot down, and so they were going to extract it. So they scrambled us, launched us, whatever term you want to use, to go up and provide air cover. So it was going to be extracted by a Chinook, which is a valuable asset, so they wanted to make sure that it was safe to do so. And so they dropped off the rigging team. We provided coverage for them, you know, just, you know, suppressive fire every now and then. The Scout was always down there. We were sort of vectoring around artillery fire coming in to help, and plus, you know, directing as we needed. And so the Chinook came in, hooked up to the downed aircraft and started out, and really was at a safe altitude when, you know, all hell sort of broke loose. And so I think what happened was that there was a North Vietnamese unit moving towards this downed aircraft as fast as they could, and they just didn't happen to get there before they extracted it. So once they started the firefight with us, we felt obliged to
take care of business. Take care of business, so to speak.
So we stayed on station. We would you know, we would neutralize them, and then they would start somewhere else. The Scout would see another position. We would start attacking on that, and we ran out of ammunition. So we flew back to Loc Ninh. We refueled, we rearmed, we did a quick check for bullet holes, systems check, and we went back, you know, and did the same thing again until there wasn't any enemy resistance. And so that's where the second one came from.
I see. What goes through your mind when you're in combat? Are there always thoughts that you could be killed or wounded during a mission? Is that always in the back of your mind?
Always a sort of an absolute term,
Yeah.
and so I would say no. The biggest thing that I felt towards my other aviator brothers and the guys on the ground was not to fail them. And that became the sole focus. I'm not going to fail to do my part. I'm not going to let my team down. I'm not going to let my pilot down. I'm not going to let my co-pilot down. I'm not going to let the Lux driver down. I mean, you know, I'm not going to do it. So that was sort of the focal point. And by doing that, you know, the fears and emotion, are they back there? Yeah, they're back there, but they're back there. Mm-hmm. The adrenaline gets going, you know, but you know, you realize that, and you know, and you deal with that. You do what's needed, and then, you know, on the way out, when things settle down, then yeah, you might say, "Dang gone, you know, I could have been killed there," but you have those thoughts, and I don't, you know, I don't think anybody came through that unscathed, because even if you're surviving, everything looks fine, you still got those mental images in your mind, so to speak, of what did happen to somebody else or what could have happened to you, and you have to live with that for a long time.
Do you, when people read about what you did or hear about what you did and call you a hero, how does that make you feel, Sandy?
Unworthy. Not a hero. I mean, I did what I was supposed to do. I was in the place and time that got recognized for that. You know, everybody says I wasn't a hero, but I served in the company of heroes. I think that probably came out of World War II, but it's true. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, you look around your unit, they're a bunch of heroes there.
We always kind of looked at it like the guys that didn't make it back are the real heroes.
That definitely gave the ultimate sacrifice. You know, there's no doubt about that, and heroic for what they did, absolutely.
Have you ever been back to Vietnam since serving during the war? If not, do you want to go back?
I have not been back. Hadn't really given it any thought. It's not on the immediate horizon. It's not something I would preclude doing, but you know, there's all sorts of places in the world I want to go, and that's not at the top of the list.
Yeah. Some combat veterans talk about the adjustments they have to make once they come back home from a war zone. What was it like for you?
It was horrific. It really was. In my particular case, you know, I had been out all day. Like I said, we flew and then we maintained. And I had come in probably, this is well after dark, somewhere I would say 8:30, 9:30 at night. And I went to our little bar to get a beer and unwind before, you know, showered, went to bed. Someone in there said, "This one needs to see you." And so I'm thinking, okay, well, you know, we've been getting some replacements in or something like that, so that's probably what it's about. So I left there, walked up to the orderly room. The S1 was in there, and basically said, "You got 4 things to do." And I just looked at him. He says, "You need to pack your bags. You need to go say goodbye. You need to out process in the morning because everything's closed then, and you need to be on the helipad at noon to fly down to Tunson Nut to get your Freedom Bird home." So literally what I did was I walked back to the room, and I had a little small hand carry bag, which is all I took over, it's all I brought back. You know, I threw a couple pair of clean underwear in there and a couple of T-shirts and my shaving lotion and kit, and I was packed. Got up the next morning after I said goodbye at the club. I got up the next morning and went and cleared supply and personnel, got my records, turned in all my stuff, and you know, got out to the helipad and flew me down to Tunson Nut. And then you had to stand in line, literally, on a little line on the floor, and there's a guy sitting on a big tennis umpire chair.
Type chair, yeah.
Yeah, watch you pee in a bottle.
Yeah.
You know, so very, very humiliating for everybody. But that was you had to have the drug test to get out of jail, so to speak. And so we did that, and once that was cleared, got loaded onto a plane and flew back to the States, landed Travis Air Force Base, and went down to San Francisco to fly back. to home, and so basically combat maintenance. 48 hours later, I'm telling Mom I'm not eating a roast beef. It's 'cause
That was quite an adjustment, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't eat roast beef. To this day, I don't do it. So it's occasionally, but it's just not something that I'm going to do. So there was no decompression time. There was just nothing that allowed you to start mentally leaving Vietnam and then mentally going back into the States. So I spent a few days at home there with my wife was still in school. Spent some time with Mom. I was going to be assigned out to the engineering flight test activity. It was Edwards Air Force Base, so got my car and drove out there. And so I was there by myself, lived in the BOQ. And it was sort of, when you're an Army officer on the Air Force Base, it's, it's sort of a novelty.
Right.
But, I was there for a while, and I said, well, this is fun work, but, I left my unit back there in Vietnam. So I went down to personnel and said, I need to go back. And they said, you need to go back where? You want to go back home? I said, no, I need to go back to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Because, I left guys over there that need my help.
Right.
And so the lady her name was Mary Ann Lake. She was a personnel officer, and she said, well, I'll put in the request and see what we can do. And so she did all the requests, and of course the commander was all upset because he didn't want me to leave. And 3 or 4 other people said, there's just, you're being emotional right now. You need to think this thing through. And I said, no, I thought it through. I got guys over there that I flew with. They're still over there. I need to be with them.
Yeah.
So
Sandy,
anyhow, it was not approved,
Right.
so I did not go back.
We're running a little short of time, but I want you to talk a little about your family. You and your wife been married how long now, and how many children do you have?
Well, we got married in 1970, so that puts us up here at 49 years. We have three children. Josh is the oldest boy. Caleb is the middle child, and then Joanna's the youngest. Josh was born in Alaska when we were up there, and he's graduated from University of Maryland. He is not in the military, but he did spend basically 7 years combined between Iraq and Afghanistan supporting the Army. He had a lot to do with setting up some of the FOBs, opening them up, and he had a lot to do with setting up the strategic communications. So he would basically get the communication set up for internet and higher, and then he would sometimes he would work with individual units moving that kind of stuff for them if they needed to. He is married, met a lady while he was over there that was also a contractor, and they're married, and they have two girls, and there's 2 granddaughters. Caleb is my son that was in the Army. He joined the Army, went through the Warrant Officer Candidate School at Fort Rucker, entirely different from the time when I was going through flight school. In this phase now, you go through the candidate school before you start flight school, so you're actually a warrant officer when you're flying. Back then, you were a candidate up till you graduated. Yeah. So he completed that, went through flight training, was transitioned into the Black Hawk, had some assignments, went over to Germany. While he was over there, went to Afghanistan. I believe it was Afghanistan. Yeah. And he was General Petraeus' pilot. He was the one pilot that stayed. They rotated through, but he was General Petraeus' pilot. He came back and he was transitioned into fixed-wing aircraft, and he flew what was called a Dash 8, which is basically a national asset. It's a Rista aircraft. So he flew that for the COCOMs, got out of the Army and continued to fly as a contractor, the COCOM mission, and now he switched over to firefighting, the aerial firefighting, and he has a contract that he works through the National Park Service, or National Forest Service. And our youngest is Joanna. She's our daughter. She went to school here at UAH, and she has been working around the different businesses. Right now, she's manages a small business, and so we're glad to have her in town with us full time.
What advice, Sandy, would you give to young people who may be considering a life in the military?
It is a good life. that has its challenges, there's no doubt, any life does. But you have the opportunity to go to school as much as you want to. You have the opportunity to see some interesting places in the world. You will get a perspective of life that's different from people that aren't in the service. That's just the way it is. You will have a view of the world outside of living in the United States all your life that will give you a wider perspective. So I would highly recommend it. I think it's a great way to go. When you look at the service, the United States population is, it's a fraction of a percent. A fraction of 1% of people are able, have the privilege to serve in the military.
Pretty good benefits too afterward.
The benefits are certainly good. I'm sure that they go up or down over the years, but yes, the benefits are good.
Sandy, you were inducted into the Madison County Military Heritage Hall of Heroes in 2018. Talk about that experience and what that meant to you.
It was certainly an honor. I was gobsmacked when I found out about it. One of the Hall of Heroes board members had called me, and I didn't know what he was talking about. I knew that I had not been nominated through the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, but he said, "Well, you've been nominated," and I said, "Well, I'm not sure why." And he said, "Well, because you meet the criteria." So, kind of find out, I was nominated by the Vietnam Veterans of America, one of the local chapter here, and that was because I had done some support for them over the years, and we'd done a lot of bantering back and forth till I finally joined their organization, and I had to provide proof that I actually served in Vietnam, which was the DD-214, and they saw the Valor Awards, and they're the ones that actually submitted me. So to be nominated by soldiers, that's pretty cool.
Sandy, I want to thank you for participating in our Price of Freedom interview series. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
All right.
Appreciate you being with us today. Thank you
Appreciate the opportunity.
If you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage series, please visit the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.us. I'm Tom Kennemer. Thank you for being with us.